How do you justify eating meat, dairy, and eggs?
Who do I have to justify it to?
Well, when there's a victim involved, wouldn't you have to justify it to them?
Like, for example, when I have my cappuccino, could I go to a cow and say, tell the cow why I'm drinking their milk, for example?
Yeah, I mean, this is just another great video that goes over or at least just elicits how ridiculously stupid some people can get when it comes to veganism who are otherwise not that stupid. It's really fascinating how many examples we have of this. Hey, what is going on, guys? So today we're going to be talking about the political and progressive commentator David Pakman, who I'm sure many of you are aware of. And we're going to be talking about a call he had in which a follower of his who is a vegan pressed him and asked, how do you morally justify paying for animals to be exploited, bred into existence and ultimately killed for food production? I'm vaguely familiar with David. I don't watch a lot of his content, but I have seen him on YouTube, and I know a lot of people who are very big fans of him. I will say, though, that this call between David and his vegan supporter really did illustrate just how much he has not really thought about animal rights and even the environmental aspect of plant-based eating. Even a quick skim through his comments of his video will tell you just how bad of a job David did at covering this topic. Many of his fans were just like, this is not correct, David. Like, you really need to do more research on this topic. So let's go through the call and respond point by point.
Hey, David.
How are you?
My question is,
Yes.
how do you justify eating meat, dairy, and eggs?
Who do I have to justify it to?
Well, when there's a victim involved, wouldn't you have to justify it to them?
I don't know. Is that if you perceive that there are victims, every victim gets an explanation? I don't even know what you're saying.
Well, yeah. So like if you or someone decides to eat meat, dairy, and eggs,
Yeah.
and if animals are dying for that decision
Yeah.
that's being made over and over again, do you feel like you could justify making that decision to that victim who has to suffer and die for it?
Like, for example, when I have my cappuccino, could I go to a cow and say, tell the cow why I'm drinking their milk, for example?
All right, so we're off to a very cringy start. When David is asked to justify putting in demand the breeding, exploitation, and murder of animals for food, his response is, who do I have to justify to? Could I go tell a cow why I'm drinking their milk, for example? He's acting as if it's absurd to be asked to justify an act which harms a sentient being who themselves are not maybe intelligent enough to have a concept of morality. I wonder what David would think if somebody was caught physically abusing a dog, and when they were asked to justify doing such a thing, the abuser says, well, who do I need to justify this to? Do you expect me to talk to a dog? I mean, how far does this reasoning go? What if somebody just decides to abuse their baby who they can't really talk to yet because the baby's 5 days old? Or a mentally handicapped human who can't understand right from wrong or moral concepts? Do we just get to do these things, and then when somebody asks us to like justify ourselves, we just go, who am I supposed to justify myself to? Like, how am I going to talk to this sentient being who can't, be on our level of intellect? Like, why would we ever operate like this? This is a great example of veganism making otherwise pretty intelligent people say really dumb things. Let's keep going.
So the problem I have with this entire framing is that it's so absolutist and narrow, and it's not really like the way the world actually works. So for example, sometimes you follow these things to their logical conclusion. Like, I've read a lot about this, and hopefully you'll indulge me for a moment. If we say, okay, eliminate all animal products whatsoever, great. So that now puts an incredible strain on a handful of crops, which now need to be grown in dramatically larger quantities in order to replace all of those animal products. This creates absolutely massive monoculture farms, which are absolutely terrible for the environment. Many of these monocultures require absolutely bonkers amounts of water in order to generate equivalent amounts of, for example, protein.
All right, so before I unpack these environmental points, let it just be known that David still has not answered the caller's question. So we're gonna go ahead and address these environmental points, but let's be clear that he has not answered the question. Alrighty, so David thinks that if the entire world went vegan, the degree to which we engage in monocropping would increase immensely because of all the animal products having to be replaced with plant products, which require monocropping. Now, let's just be clear, monocropping is not a necessary entailment of veganism or plant-based agriculture, but let's just assume that's the case just for the sake of argument, that there's no other way to grow plants and that we can only grow plants through monoculture. Now, perhaps David is just unaware of the fact that in order for animals to be grown to the point that we can exploit them and murder them for their flesh and excretions, we must feed them crops to begin with. And these crops are grown in monoculture. This means there is a possibility that monocropping is higher in our current world than it would be in a vegan world where monocropping was 100% necessary. Let's see if we can determine this with some calculations. So around 50% of our habitable land is being used for agriculture. 77% of this land is being used for animal agriculture. And this 77% includes grazing land for animals and arable land used for animal feed production. Animal feed comes from crop production, if that wasn't clear. And although 77% of the 50% of habitable land being used for agriculture is for animal agriculture is only supplying 18% of our calories, whereas plant agriculture for humans only takes up 23% of total agricultural land and supplies 83% of our calories. This detail is extremely important, and you'll understand why in a moment. Now, back to the 77% figure. It isn't totally clear what percentage of the 77% of land use is dedicated specifically to crop production for animal feed. But according to the FAO, 33% of croplands are used for livestock feed production. So with this figure, let us assume that the remaining 67% of cropland is being used to grow crops directly for humans, and the remaining 33% is being used to grow crops for animals. Let's also steelman animal agriculture and pretend that the 33% of crops being grown to feed livestock is supplying the 18% of our global calories. This, of course, isn't true because the 18% figure cited earlier included calories gained from grazing animals, grass-fed cows, etc., and not just animals we consume who are fed crops that we manually grow. Just a heads up, there's going to be a lot of math coming up, so you're probably going to want to at some point pause the video and take a look at the math to make sense of what I'm saying. But for the time being, just listen to what I'm saying for what it is and look at the math a little later. So if current amounts of monocropping for plant foods from 67% of our cropland generates 83% of our world's calories, then in order to grow enough food to supply 100% of our world's calories, we would need to use around 20.5% more monocropping land than we currently do to make up for calories lost in eradicating animal agriculture. And that is 20.5% of 67%, which is around 13.72%, meaning we would need 80.72% of the cropland used today to supply global calories, which frees up to 19.28% of land that would not be used for monocropping. Again, the math for all of this is on the screen right now, so if you want, you can pause or just keep going and look back at it later. So it is very clear that in wanting to minimize the degree to which we engage in monocropping, David Pakman should want to live in a vegan world as opposed to the world we live in right now. Oh, and by the way, David Pakman did mention that these monocrops are terrible for the environment and use up so much water, so presumably David cares about the environment and also wants to minimize water use. This is also odd to hear considering what the best data available says concerning what would happen if we move to a vegan world. From this paper titled "Reducing Food's Environmental Impacts Through Producers and Consumers," moving from current diets to a diet that excludes animal products has transformative potential in regard to the environment and water use. This move would help reduce food's land use by 3.1 billion hectares, which is a 76% reduction. This would include a 19% reduction in arable land, and our food's greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by 6.6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, which is a 49% reduction. Acidification can go down by 50%, eutrophication could go down by 49%, and scarcity-weighted freshwater withdrawals can go down by 19%. So if David Pakman really cares for the environment in the way that he is eliciting he does in this call with this vegan fan, then it's very clear that he should be opting for a plant-based food system or a vegan world.
The water use also leads to many, many animals dying, everything from mice to, all sorts of other things. And so we can do the entire thing that I gather is what you would consider to be morally right, and then we would still end up killing so many animals by virtue of how we restructure and reorganize what humans eat. Are we really better off by killing different animals through drought and monoculture, etc.? I mean, I don't know. You tell me.
So David mentions things like water use for monocropping leading to animals dying. We've already covered that less monocropping would occur in a vegan world than our current one. With this in mind, we understand that less monocropping in a vegan world would lead to less animal death from monocropping. And if David cares for reducing animal suffering and animal rights violations, then perhaps he would be interested in the fact that the vegan world would not entail breeding animals into existence in the first place to exploit and kill them for food. Which, by the way, because these animals are bred into existence, we know for a fact that on the net, this increases overall death.
But you did kind of not answer the question I asked, David.
The answer to my question is I don't know what I would tell a cow. I've never spoken to a cow, so I don't know. But what I'm telling you is it's the type of question that's really just a black hole. It doesn't really go anywhere in terms of answering the broader questions about how would we feed the planet on 5 monoculture crops that would have to be exploded, you know, 1,000,000% in order to replace all the animal products. You're not answering that question to me, which is okay too.
Okay.
What I'm telling you is your framing is arbitrarily narrow and sort of myopic.
So David mentions the whole, oh, what would I say to a cow thing, which we've already covered and how absurd that is. And after being pushed on the initial question the caller had in the beginning of this phone call, David just says, your question doesn't go anywhere in terms of answering the broader question about how we would feed the planet. And he even suggested that monocropping would have to explode 1,000,000% in order to replace animal products. Well, as discussed earlier, even in a world where monocropping was the only way to produce plants, a vegan world would require or, entail less amounts of cropland used for monocropping.
Well, I can respond to that counterpoint that you bring up.
Okay.
But I do want to say that, about the meat, dairy, and egg industry, like it is like terribly, terribly cruel, the standard practices of meat, dairy, and eggs. So
yeah, I'm with you right there. I'm with you right there. The standard practices are horrible. What I do is, I eat very little red meat, for example. And when I do, I try to know exactly what farm is it coming from, where I could drive and see what are the conditions. I think that, like, for example, I'm on pasture-free stuff where I know exactly where it's coming. I'm doing certain things for myself, but I agree with you. The standard practices are terrible. You and I are on the same page.
So we're getting the classic, oh, factory farms are bad. I agree, but I get my meat from free range, pasture raised animals. I visit the farm. I see the conditions, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard it before. I would hope that David would not consider it ethical to kill dogs for meat who have been raised in better conditions than factory farms. And of course, I also hope he wouldn't accept it as ethical to kill free humans who have had better lives than factory farmed animals. And if the response to that is, well, humans and animals are different, we're just going to have to ask you, what is the morally relevant difference between humans and animals such that it is ethical to kill one who has been raised in better conditions than a factory farm, but not the other? Just a basic consistency test. If he says something like, oh, low intelligence is what justifies it, then does he think that it's ethical to kill disabled people who show no greater degree of intelligence than cows on happy farms that are, having better conditions than factory farms? Like, of course he wouldn't think that's ethical. I mean, at least I hope not. Some people will say it's ethical to remain consistent, but something tells me that David would not be one of those people. We'll see. Maybe he'll respond to this video and we'll find out. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all that was worth responding to. The remainder of the video is the monocropping thing being repeated again. And yeah, I mean, this is just another great video that goes over or just elicits how ridiculously stupid some people can get when it comes to veganism who are otherwise not that stupid. It's really fascinating how many examples we have of this. But yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. If you enjoy my work and you want to support me on Patreon, there will be a link in the pinned comment. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you're going to hear online. So if you want to get that, that'll also be linked below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude.
Fuck off, I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
Even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,